The glass door shattered silence before it hit the wall. 20 executives in the 73rd floor boardroom froze like deer caught in headlights. Catherine Harlow Sterling rose from her chair, the Patek Philippe diamond-studded watch on her wrist catching the merciless afternoon light streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. Her voice emerged cold enough to frost every surface in the room. "You're fired." The color drained from Ethan Brennan's face like water from a broken dam. 34 years old, brilliant with code architecture reduced to a trembling mess by 3 syllables. 20 department heads held their breath. Several had occupied that same chair of shame before. They knew this script by heart, but then impossibly a voice cut through the tension. A janitor's voice. Calm, unwavering, completely devoid of fear. "With all due respect, ma'am, crushing someone's spirit won't fix the problem." Every head swiveled toward the doorway. Standing there, one hand still on the handle, was a man none of them recognized. Gray maintenance uniform coal-stitched above the breast pocket. Tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of weathered hands that spoke of real work, not keyboards and conference calls. His face was open, honest crow's feet at the corners of dark eyes that held absolutely no terror of the woman who made Fortune 500 executives stammer. He was holding a mop. The silence that followed was so profound several people wondered if they'd hallucinated the interruption. No one spoke to Catherine Sterling like that. No one interrupted her meetings. No one, especially not a janitor, challenged her in front of her executive team. Catherine turned slowly, expression unreadable. "Excuse me." The man Cole, according to his uniform, stepped into the room without hesitation. "I said crushing someone's spirit won't fix the problem. The presentation system malfunction isn't about incompetence. It's about a faulty cable connection in junction box 7B that maintenance was supposed to address last week but didn't." He gestured with the mop handle toward the screen. "I can have it working in 3 minutes if you'd like, or you can continue making Mr. Brennan feel worthless for something that wasn't entirely his fault. Your choice." The room was so still a few executives weren't sure they were still breathing. Garrett, Catherine's executive assistant, stood by the wall with his tablet face gone the color of old parchment. Ethan Brennan looked like he might faint or cry or both. And Catherine. Her eyes narrowed to slits of winter ice. "Who are you?" "Wyatt Cole. Started Monday in facilities maintenance. And I apologize for interrupting, but I was fixing a leak in the ceiling panel outside and heard the situation." Wyatt set his mop against the wall with a casualness that seemed almost aggressive in its normalcy. "Seems like everyone's focused on blame instead of solutions. And that struck me as inefficient." "Inefficient." Catherine repeated the word like it was spoken in a foreign tongue she'd never learned. "You, a janitor who's been here less than a week, are lecturing me about efficiency." "Not lecturing, ma'am. Observing." Wyatt moved toward the presentation equipment at the front of the room, undeterred by the 20 pairs of eyes tracking him like surveillance cameras. He crouched beside the console, opened a panel with practiced ease, began examining connections with the confidence of someone who'd done this 1,000 times before. "See where I come from. When something breaks, you fix it. You don't spend 20 minutes making someone feel small about it breaking. That's just wasted time." His fingers moved quickly across the keyboard, navigating through system folders, opening directories, running recovery protocols that most of the IT staff would have fumbled through. "Mr. Brennan, can you try your remote now?" Ethan, too stunned to disobey, clicked the remote. The screen flickered, then blazed to life with his presentation title slide. Relief washed over his face like rain after drought. "There you go." Wyatt closed the panel and stood wiping his hands on his uniform. "Cable connection was corroded. Happens in buildings this old when humidity gets in the conduits. Not something your IT department would catch. It's a physical infrastructure issue." He looked directly at Catherine, his gaze level and unwavering. "Mr. Brennan's presentation is ready now. Seems like the most efficient use of everyone's time would be to hear it." For a long moment, Catherine simply stared at this janitor who'd walked into her domain, fixed her problem, and implicitly called her cruel, all without a trace of fear or apology. Something dangerous flickered in her eyes, something that made Garrett seriously consider updating his resume before the day ended. Then Catherine spoke, her voice soft as falling snow and twice as cold. "Mr. Cole, thank you for your assistance. You may return to your duties." It was a dismissal clear and unmistakable from a woman whose orders were never questioned. Wyatt nodded. "Sure thing." But before he turned to leave, he looked at Ethan Brennan and said something no one expected. "Good luck with your presentation, Mr. Brennan. From what I saw on that title slide, looks like solid work." Then he picked up his mop and walked out, leaving behind a room full of people who couldn't quite process what had just happened. Catherine returned to her seat with glacial composure, every line of her body radiating controlled fury. "Mr. Brennan, you may proceed." Ethan's presentation, a comprehensive analysis of server optimization protocols that would save the company $3.2 million annually, went flawlessly. His voice steadied as he moved through the data, confidence returning with each slide. It was brilliant work, actually. The kind of innovative thinking that separated good companies from great ones. Catherine barely heard a word of it. Her mind was locked on the janitor who dared to challenge her. Wyatt Cole. The audacity of it was staggering. The sheer unthinking courage or stupidity, she couldn't decide which, to walk into her meeting, contradict her, and then speak to her as if she were just another person. Not a billionaire, not a CEO, not the woman whose reputation made grown men sweat, just a person. It was intolerable. The Sterling Global Industries Tower pierced the Manhattan skyline like a chrome needle. 73 floors of glass and steel that reflected everything but revealed nothing. From her corner office on the top floor, Catherine surveyed the city below with the detachment of a chess master studying pieces on a board. She didn't see people down there. She saw patterns, predictabilities, variables to be controlled. At 42, Catherine had built an empire that made seasoned executives check their presentations 3 times before entering her orbit. Her wealth was estimated at $4.3 billion, but numbers were just numbers. What mattered was the power. The way a room shifted when she entered. The way conversations died mid-sentence. The way even her praise felt like a warning. She wore her trademark charcoal suits like armor. Dark hair pulled back so severely it seemed to stretch her face taut, sharpening already sharp features. Her eyes were the color of winter ice, and they missed nothing. A wrinkle in someone's shirt. A half-second hesitation before answering. The slight tremor in a voice that betrayed uncertainty. Catherine collected weaknesses the way other people collected art. This particular Thursday morning had started like any other. She'd arrived at 5:47, always before sunrise, always before anyone else. She'd reviewed 3 acquisition proposals, rejected 2, and torn apart the third with red ink precision that would make the mergers and acquisitions team rebuild it from scratch. By 8:30, she'd attended a virtual meeting with her Tokyo office where her fluent Japanese had surprised a new partner who'd hoped the language barrier might buy him some grace. It hadn't. At 9:15, she'd passed through the executive floor with Garrett scrambling to keep pace, his tablet glowing with her schedule. Employees flattened themselves against walls as she passed, eyes down, conversations dying like candles snuffed out. The fear was palpable, thick enough to taste. And Catherine. She breathed it in like oxygen. That night, Catherine didn't sleep well. She lay in her penthouse bedroom, all white marble and minimalist furniture that looked more like an art installation than a place where humans rested, and stared at the ceiling, replaying the boardroom scene with surgical precision. Every word, every gesture, the way Wyatt Cole had moved through her space with the confidence of someone who belonged there not because of title or wealth, but because he simply existed, and that was enough. It was infuriating. At 4:23, she gave up on sleep entirely and went to her home office, pulling up the HR files on her private server. Wyatt Michael Cole, age 37. Hired through the facilities management contractor 5 days ago. Previous employment: construction supervisor, elementary school maintenance director, briefly unemployed. Education: associate degree in building systems technology, some college but no bachelor's. Marital status: widowed, dependent, one daughter, age 9. Catherine studied his employment photo, a straightforward headshot where he looked directly at the camera with that same unwavering gaze he'd given her in the conference room. No practiced smile, no attempt to appear more impressive than he was. Just himself. She closed the file with more force than necessary, the laptop clicking shut like a trap. The widowed part caught in her mind like a hook. So he understood loss. That explained nothing about why he'd thought it appropriate to lecture her about management style, but at least it suggested he wasn't completely naive about how the world worked. Though if he thought losing a spouse gave him insight into running a multi-billion-dollar corporation, he was more foolish than she'd initially assessed. 15 years ago, Catherine had been different, softer. She'd believed in collaboration and mentorship and building teams based on mutual respect. She'd thought if you were excellent at what you did and treated people well, success would follow. Then came Richard Blackwell. They'd started a tech company together right out of business school. Richard was brilliant, charismatic, someone she'd trusted completely. They were friends, or she'd thought they were. For 3 years, they built something incredible. Revolutionary software that could have changed their industry. Catherine poured everything into it. Her time, her money, her reputation. She believed in him, in them, in what they were creating. Then 2 weeks before their major product launch, she discovered Richard had been systematically stealing their proprietary code, copying it to a competitor in exchange for a position in their executive team and a significant equity stake. Everything they'd built, everything she'd invested, he sold out from under her to advance his own career. It destroyed the company, destroyed her reputation in the industry for years. She lost everything. Her savings, her credibility, her ability to trust her own judgment about people. Worse than the financial loss was the betrayal itself. She'd trusted him completely, considered him family, and he'd looked her in the eye every single day while systematically robbing her blind. So Catherine rebuilt herself from scratch, made fear her primary tool because fear was reliable in ways that loyalty and friendship weren't. Fear didn't betray you. Fear didn't steal from you. Fear just worked, until it didn't. She thought of Wyatt Cole's words, crushing someone's spirit won't fix the problem. The casual dismissal, the implicit criticism. He might as well have looked directly at Catherine and said her leadership style was garbage. 5 days after the boardroom incident, Catherine found herself doing something unprecedented. She was walking through the building's lower floors without purpose or destination, just observing. On the 38th floor, she saw Wyatt helping the night security guard understand a new electronic time card system. Patience evident as he walked the older man through each step twice. On the 29th floor, he was repairing a broken chair for a custodian who'd been making do with wobbly furniture rather than request a replacement because nobody listens to maintenance requests anyway. On the 17th floor, he was showing an intern how to properly recycle electronics instead of throwing them in regular trash, explaining the environmental impact in a way that was educational rather than preachy. And everywhere that same quality. People trusted him, spoke to him freely, smiled at him with genuine warmth, not the calculated professional pleasantness everyone showed Catherine. By the time she returned to her office, Catherine felt something unfamiliar stirring in her chest. Not quite anger anymore, something more uncomfortable. It might have been jealousy. Across the city in Queens, Wyatt Cole's alarm went off at 5:30. He silenced it before the sound could wake Harper, padding quietly down the narrow hallway of their third-floor walk-up. The framed photo on the wall caught his eye as it did every morning. Rachel in her wedding dress, smile brighter than anything he'd seen before or since. 3 years gone. Sometimes it felt like 3 decades, sometimes like 3 days. In the small kitchen, he made breakfast with the efficiency of long practice. Scrambled eggs, toast cut into star shapes because Harper thought it was more special. Her school uniform already ironed and hanging on the chair. Lunchbox packed peanut butter and jelly sandwich, apple slices, chocolate chip cookies. A note written on the napkin, "Love you, Jellybean." Rachel had started the lunchbox note tradition. Wyatt continued it after she died because what else could he do? Harper needed to know she was loved every day, even in the small things. Harper appeared at 6:15, brown hair, a bird's nest, wearing faded unicorn pajamas, rubbing sleep from her eyes but smiling when she saw breakfast. "Morning, Jellybean." "Morning, Papa." She'd called him Papa since she was a toddler, never Daddy. "Did you make star toast?" "Always for my princess." Harper climbed into her chair, legs swinging. "Papa, can I ask you something?" "Always." "Do you ever think about liking someone new like you liked Mommy?" The question stabbed like a blade. Wyatt sat across from his daughter, choosing words carefully. "Why do you ask, sweetheart?" "Because Mia at school says her mom, Mia's mom, just started dating someone. And I just wondered if you felt lonely." "Mommy's been gone 3 years." 3 years. 1,095 days since Rachel went into the hospital the last time and never came out. Since the cancer they thought would be treatable turned into a death sentence with a countdown clock. 7 months from diagnosis to death. She was 34, Harper was 6, and Wyatt had to learn how to be both father and mother to a grieving child while he was bleeding inside himself. "Listen, Jellybean, I'm not lonely because I have you. And I loved your mom very much. Still love her, but that doesn't mean I'll be alone forever. So you could like someone. Maybe, someday, if the right person came along." He tilted his head. "Would you be okay with that?" Harper thought seriously, sipping her orange juice. I think Mommy would want you to be happy. And I want you to be happy. So yeah, I'd be okay." After dropping Harper at school, Wyatt stood outside the Washington Elementary gates, watching his daughter run toward her friend group. She turned back to wave, the small gesture they did every morning. He waved back. Rachel would be so proud of their girl, strong and kind and smart, all from her. And him, he'd tried to be a good father, a good man, live by the values Rachel taught him. Work hard, be honest, show up for people who need you. But he'd closed his heart, hadn't he? After losing Rachel, he'd decided it was safer never to let anyone close enough to hurt him like that again. And now Harper was asking if he was lonely, and he realized yes, he was. He missed that connection. Missed having a partner. Missed being loved and loving back. But how did he know when it was right, when he was ready to risk his heart again at Sterling Global? Wyatt worked with the quiet competence that had defined his entire career. He wasn't just a janitor, though. There was nothing wrong with that work, nothing shameful about keeping a building running. But his skills went deeper. Licensed electrician. 8 years as a construction supervisor managing crews of 50 plus. He knew building systems better than most engineers. He'd stepped back from high-pressure supervisory roles after Rachel died because Harper needed him present. Needed a father who came home at 5, who coached her soccer team, who was there for homework and bedtime stories. The pay cut stung. The tiny Queens apartment was nothing like the house they'd owned in the suburbs. But Harper had him, fully, completely, and that mattered more than any career trajectory. When he'd heard Catherine humiliating Ethan Brennan through that ceiling panel, something in Wyatt snapped. He'd seen that before on construction sites where foremen screamed at workers until they quit or broke. In hospitals where doctors dismissed Rachel's symptoms as probably just stress until it was too late to treat effectively. Rachel died partly because she was too afraid to speak up. Afraid of seeming dramatic, afraid of bothering her doctor, afraid of demanding what she needed. Wyatt had promised her in that hospital bed the last time. Promised he'd never stay silent when he saw someone being hurt, and he could do something to stop it. Even if speaking up was terrifying, even if it cost him his job, even if it cost him everything. Because Harper needed to know her father was a man who stood up for what was right. Not a man who turned away because of power. So he'd walked in. No plan, no script, just the certainty that leaving Ethan Brennan crushed like that was wrong. And when he saw the actual technical problem, corroded cable in the junction box he'd reported last week. But nobody fixed anger flared. This woman was destroying a good man over a problem she'd created by ignoring maintenance reports. And she didn't even know it, so he fixed it and told her the truth. And now Wyatt Cole, 37-year-old widower with a 9-year-old daughter to raise, might have just torched his short maintenance career. But Harper would be proud, and that was what mattered. The following week, Catherine was in her office reviewing acquisition files when Garrett appeared with an unusual expression. "Ms. Sterling, there's someone here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment, but she's quite insistent." "Who?" "Says her name is Margaret Brennan." Catherine's eyebrow arched. "Ethan Brennan's mother." She indicated as much, yes. Catherine considered having security remove her. That would be the efficient response, but curiosity won out. "Send her up." Margaret Brennan entered Catherine's office with the fearlessness of someone who'd survived things that made billionaire disapproval seem trivial. She was 68, small but fierce, the kind of woman who'd raised children with iron discipline and unconditional love in equal measure. She wore a practical coat and carried a worn purse, and she looked at Catherine with eyes that had seen through more impressive facades. "Ms. Sterling, thank you for seeing me." "Mrs. Brennan, what can I do for you?" Margaret wasn't impressed by the power play of Catherine remaining seated. "You can stop breaking my son's spirit. He came home last week looking like he'd been gutted. Couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, all because you decided to humiliate him in front of his colleagues over a technical problem that wasn't his fault. Your son's performance is between him and this company. I don't discuss personnel matters with—" Margaret interrupted, and the steel in her voice could have cut diamonds. "I'm not here for discussion. I'm here to tell you that Ethan is a good man. He's brilliant at his job. Works 16-hour days trying to meet your impossible standards, and one technical failure, one moment of bad luck, and you treated him like he was worthless. I treated him according to the standards we maintain here. You treated him like he was disposable." Margaret stepped closer to the desk, and Catherine found herself resisting the urge to lean back. "My son is not disposable. He's a human being with feelings and dignity. Just because you've forgotten what those things mean doesn't give you the right to strip them from others." The words hit like a physical blow. Catherine's hands clenched involuntarily beneath the desk. "Mrs. Brennan, I think you should leave." "I'll leave. But first you should know that the only reason Ethan didn't resign last week was because of that janitor, Wyatt Cole. Ethan was drafting his resignation letter that evening, couldn't stop shaking, convinced his career was over. And Mr. Cole, who'd never even met my son before that day, tracked him down in the parking garage, sat with him for an hour, talked him through it, reminded him that one person's cruelty doesn't define his worth." Margaret headed for the door, then paused, looking back. "My son stayed because someone showed him kindness when you showed him contempt. You might want to think about what that says about your leadership, Ms. Sterling. Not the billion-dollar kind, the human kind." Then she was gone, leaving Catherine alone with words that seemed to echo in the suddenly too large office. For several minutes, Catherine simply sat staring at the space where Margaret Brennan had stood. The accusation of cruelty shouldn't have bothered her. She'd been called worse: ruthless, merciless, a corporate ice queen, the devil in designer suits. None of it had ever mattered because results mattered, success mattered, the architecture of power mattered. But you've forgotten what those things mean. Feelings and dignity lodged somewhere uncomfortable. Because it was true. She had forgotten, or more accurately, she'd deliberately excised those weaknesses from herself years ago, carved them out like tumors because they made you vulnerable, made you weak, made you into the kind of person who could be betrayed and destroyed. Like she'd been destroyed once in another lifetime before she'd rebuilt herself into something that couldn't be broken again. Catherine stood abruptly and walked to her window, looking down at the city that had been her kingdom and her prison for 15 years. 73 floors below the plaza was busy with lunch hour traffic, and there, sitting on the same bench as yesterday, was Wyatt Cole. He wasn't alone. Ethan Brennan sat beside him, the two men deep in conversation. As Catherine watched, Wyatt said something that made Ethan laugh. Actually laugh, head thrown back, genuine and free. Then Ethan seemed to be explaining something technical, gesturing with his hands, and Wyatt listened with focused attention, nodding, asking questions. Two men who had nothing in common except humanity, connecting like it was the simplest thing in the world, because for them it was. Tuesday morning arrived with the first sign of trouble. A flicker in the overhead lights during Catherine's 9 o'clock strategy meeting. Everyone paused, looked up, then continued when the lights stabilized. Catherine made a mental note to have facilities check the electrical system, then promptly forgot about it as the discussion turned to the Tokyo acquisition. At 10:17, the climate control system began pumping air, noticeably warmer than the precise 68 degrees Catherine mandated throughout the building. Garrett called facilities. They promised to investigate. At 11:33, 3 elevator banks shut down simultaneously, trapping 2 executives between floors and forcing everyone else to use the stairs or wait for the 4 remaining functional elevators. The building engineer assured Catherine it was a minor software glitch, easily resolved. At 12:04, the building's backup generator kicked in for no apparent reason, causing a brief surge that crashed several computer systems on the lower floors. And at 12:47, every light in the Sterling Global Industries tower went dark, not dimmed, not flickering, completely, utterly dark. Catherine was in her office on a video call with the London team when her screen went black. The sudden absence of the computer's hum made the silence profound. Through her window, she could see other buildings glowing with normal power, which meant this wasn't a grid failure. This was their building, their system, their problem. She stood moving toward her office door with the muscle memory of someone who knew every inch of her territory. But opening the door revealed chaos. The executive floor, usually pristine and ordered, had transformed into confusion. People emerged from offices with phone flashlights, activated voices rising in question and concern. "What's happening? Is this a fire drill? My presentation was due in 20 minutes. Are we supposed to evacuate?" Catherine's mind shifted immediately into crisis mode. She pulled out her phone, still charged, thank God, and called building security. The line was busy. She tried facilities management, same result. She tried Garrett, who appeared at her elbow almost immediately, face pale in the dim light from the windows. "Ms. Sterling, building-wide power failure. Emergency lighting should have kicked in but didn't. Get me the building engineer now. He's not responding. I think he's trapped in one of the elevators." Of course he was. 73 floors of confused, increasingly panicked employees, no emergency lighting, no functioning elevators, and no building engineer. The situation was rapidly deteriorating from inconvenient to dangerous. "Tell security to start organized evacuation procedures. Stairwells only, orderly descent, no panic, and someone find out what the hell happened to our backup systems." Garrett nodded and disappeared into the darkness, his phone light bobbing like a firefly. Catherine stood in her doorway, watching her executives mill about with the purposeless confusion of people whose competence was entirely dependent on functional systems. Without computers, without lights, without the infrastructure they took for granted, they were helpless. It was, she realized with bitter irony, exactly how she'd felt during her conversation with Wyatt about human connection. Competent in one domain, utterly lost in another. The thought of Wyatt crystallized into a question. Where was facilities maintenance during this crisis? As if summoned by the thought, she heard his voice cutting through the confusion. Calm, authoritative in a way that had nothing to do with title or hierarchy. "Folks, I need everyone to stay calm and move toward the stairwells in an orderly fashion. Use your phone lights to see and help anyone who needs assistance. We're going to get through this fine, but I need cooperation." Catherine moved toward the voice, finding Wyatt in the central corridor with what appeared to be a battery-powered lantern directing traffic like a conductor with an orchestra. People were actually listening to him, the panic in the air dissipating as his composure spread through the crowd. "Mr. Cole, what's the situation?" Wyatt looked at her, and in the stark shadows cast by the emergency lantern, his expression was grimly serious. "Main power is completely out. Backup generators failed to engage, which suggests either a software problem or physical damage to the transfer switches." Emergency lighting system is down, which should be impossible since it's on a separate circuit with independent battery backup. He met her eyes directly. This isn't a simple outage, Ms. Sterling. Something's fundamentally wrong with the building's electrical infrastructure. How long to fix it? Depends on what's wrong. Could be 20 minutes. Could be 20 hours. He gestured to the evacuating crowd. Right now, priority is getting people out safely and making sure no one's trapped or injured. After that, I can investigate the systems. You're a janitor. The words came out more harshly than Catherine intended, sharpened by stress. Wyatt didn't flinch. I'm also a licensed electrician and former construction supervisor who's worked on building systems a lot more complex than this one, so yes me unless you've got someone better available. Catherine thought of her building engineer trapped in an elevator, her facilities manager who hadn't answered his phone, her entire technical team who were probably as panicked as everyone else. No, I don't. Then let me do my job. Wyatt handed the lantern to a passing executive. Sarah, can you help guide people to the north stairwell? Stay calm, move slowly, make sure the elderly folks on this floor get assistance. Sarah, a senior vice president who normally wouldn't take orders from anyone below C-suite level, nodded immediately and took the lantern without question. The automatic deference to Wyatt's authority in this moment would have fascinated Catherine if she weren't so focused on the unfolding crisis. What do you need from me? The question emerged before Catherine could stop it, asking instead of demanding, requesting instead of commanding. Wyatt looked at her with something like surprise, as if he'd expected her to demand, rather than offer. Keep people calm and organized up here while I get down to the electrical room. If you can reach security, tell them not to call the fire department yet. Too many people on the stairwells already. Adding firefighters will create congestion. We've got time before this becomes a real emergency. How do you know that? Because the building's not on fire. Structural integrity is fine. And the biggest danger right now is panic causing a stampede, which we prevent by staying calm and moving deliberately. He was already heading toward the stairwell, pulling a flashlight from his maintenance belt. I'll radio up when I know more. Then he was gone, descending into darkness while Catherine stood in the center of controlled K, watching her executives and assistants and department heads navigate the crisis with varying degrees of competence. Catherine spent the next 40 minutes doing something she'd never done before, actually working alongside her employees as equals. She helped an older accountant navigate the dark corridors to the stairwell. She carried boxes of critical files for a paralegal who couldn't manage them in the descent simultaneously. She answered questions she didn't have answers to with honesty instead of false certainty, and discovered that people responded better to, I don't know yet, but we're working on it, than they ever had to her usual absolute declarations. By the time the 71st floor was mostly evacuated with only essential personnel remaining, Catherine found herself in the emergency stairwell with Garrett and a handful of executives who'd refused to leave without her. Ms. Sterling, you should evacuate too. We can coordinate from the plaza. Not until we understand what happened. Catherine checked her phone. No word from Wyatt. No updates from security. The building felt wrong in the darkness, like a body without a heartbeat. Has anyone reached the building engineer? Fire department got him out of the elevator 10 minutes ago. He's shaken up but fine. Said he has no idea what caused the failure. Everything was normal on his morning checks. Catherine's mind raced through possibilities. Cyber attacks seemed most likely, but the physical failure of multiple redundant systems suggested something more direct. Sabotage, structural damage, a catastrophic equipment failure that somehow cascaded through every safety backup. Her phone buzzed, text from an unknown number. This is Cole using maintenance phone. Found the problem. It's bad. Need you in electrical room. Sub-level 2. Catherine showed the message to Garrett. I'm going down. Ms. Sterling, that's not. I'm going down. Her tone brooking no argument. You coordinate evacuation from here. If I'm not back in 30 minutes, send security after me. She descended before Garrett could protest further, phone flashlight casting wild shadows on the concrete stairwell walls. 73 floors down. Her legs would hate her tomorrow, assuming there was a tomorrow that wasn't consumed by whatever disaster had crippled her building. The sub-level electrical room was a cathedral of machinery normally humming with the quiet power that kept 73 floors of commerce functioning. Now it was silent except for the sound of Wyatt moving through the darkness with a heavy-duty flashlight examining junction boxes and circuit panels with systematic focus. "Mr. Cole!" He turned, and in the harsh flashlight beam his face was grave. "You shouldn't be down here. It's not safe. It's my building. Tell me what you found." Wyatt gestured to a massive electrical panel on the far wall. Even Catherine, with no technical expertise, could see the damage. Scorch marks around several breakers, melted insulation, the acrid smell of burned wiring. Someone deliberately overloaded the main distribution panel, created a surge that fried the primary circuits, and here's the sophisticated part: they also damaged the transfer switches for the backup generators. Everything that should have kept power running during a failure was systematically disabled. Catherine felt ice form in her stomach. Sabotage. Professional sabotage. Whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing. They didn't just want to cause an outage. They wanted to create maximum chaos by ensuring nothing could come back online quickly. "Can you fix it?" Wyatt was quiet for a moment, his flashlight playing over the damaged equipment. "The backup generators are intact. The transfer switches can be bypassed manually. I can restore partial power to emergency systems and about 40% of the building within an hour, maybe 2. But Ms. Sterling, this isn't my biggest concern right now." "What is?" He moved to a different panel, forcing open a locked access door that revealed a tangle of data cables. Several were severed, cut with precision. "Your server room is on sub-level 3. If they had access down here, they had access there. And if they went to this much trouble to disable power, they probably went to equal trouble with your data systems." The implications hit Catherine like a physical blow. Every contract, every acquisition file, every piece of proprietary information that made Sterling Global worth billions. If someone had breached the servers during the chaos, I need to get to the server room. "Not without me. If someone's still down there, you're not going alone." They descended one more level in tense silence, the air growing cooler and more still. The server room door was ajar. Wrong. Immediately wrong, because that door was supposed to be secured with biometric locks that wouldn't open without power unless someone physically broke through. Wyatt entered first, flashlight sweeping the room. Banks of dark servers stood like tombstones, their usual symphony of fans and trees utterly slint. He moved methodically through the aisles, checking for physical damage or signs of data theft equipment. "Clear, no one here." He paused, examining the equipment more closely. "And honestly, I don't see signs of data extraction equipment. If they were here, they came and went before the power failed. Or they're planning to come back. Possible. Which is why we need power restored and security tightened immediately." Wyatt moved back toward the door. "Stay here. I'm going to manually engage the backup generators. Should take about 15 minutes. When power comes back, check your systems immediately." "Wyatt." His first name emerged before Catherine could stop it, born from fear she wasn't accustomed to feeling. He paused, turning back with an expression that was almost gentle. "Be careful." "Always am. I've got a 9-year-old depending on me." Then he was gone, and Catherine was alone in a room full of silent machines that contained the entirety of her professional life. She'd never felt so helpless. All her wealth, all her power, all her carefully constructed control useless in the face of darkness and sabotage. And the fundamental fragility of systems she'd taken for granted. 14 minutes later, lights flickered and then blazed to life throughout the sub-level. The servers began their boot sequence drives, spinning up with sounds like mechanical breathing. Catherine's phone immediately flooded with notifications, texts, calls, alerts from every corner of her organization demanding explanation and instruction. But before she dealt with any of that, she called Wyatt's maintenance phone. He answered on the first ring, slightly out of breath. "Generators are running. I've got about 40% of building power restored, focused on emergency systems and ground-level floors. Full restoration will take a professional electrical crew probably tomorrow at earliest. The servers are booting. I need to assess potential data breach. Already called building security, told them to get cyber forensics in immediately. Also suggested they review security footage for the past week to see who had access to the sub-levels. Catherine was silent for a moment, processing the fact that a janitor had thought 10 steps ahead while she'd been paralyzed by fear. Thank you. Just doing what needs doing. A pause. Ms. Sterling, you should know when I was down in the electrical room I found something else. A timer mechanism, pretty crude but functional. Whatever happened today, it was designed to trigger during business hours for maximum disruption. Someone wanted to hurt your company specifically. The ice in Catherine's stomach spread to her limbs. This wasn't random corporate espionage. This was targeted, personal. I need to get back upstairs. Meet you in your office in 10 minutes. We need to talk about security protocols. Catherine spent the next 6 hours in controlled crisis mode, coordinating with cybersecurity teams, briefing the board of directors via emergency conference call, managing communications to prevent stock panic, reviewing security footage with building security chief that revealed nothing obvious, normal maintenance access over the past week, no unfamiliar faces, no suspicious behavior. Whoever had done this knew the building's rhythms well enough to blend perfectly. Through it all, Wyatt worked alongside building security and the emergency electrical crew. His competence was so evident that even the professional electricians deferred to his assessment of the damaged systems. He explained technical details to Catherine in terms she could understand, helped her prioritize which systems to restore first, and at one point physically prevented her from making a decision that would have saved money but compromised safety. No, his voice flat, unyielding. I don't care about your timeline. If those circuits aren't checked properly, we risk an actual fire next time there's a surge. Your impatience isn't worth people's lives. Catherine, who hadn't been directly contradicted by anyone in her organization in years, simply nodded and approved the longer timeline. By 7 that evening, the immediate crisis was contained. Partial power restored, critical systems secured, cyber forensics finding no evidence of data breach, a plan in place for full restoration within 48 hours. The board was satisfied, the employees were safe. The damage was real but manageable. Catherine stood in her office, now illuminated only by emergency lighting that cast strange shadows, and felt exhaustion crash over her like a wave. Not just physical tiredness from the stress and the 73 flights of stairs, but something deeper. Soul-level weariness from maintaining perfect control for so long that the first real crack had nearly shattered her completely. A knock on her open door. Wyatt stood there, maintenance uniform dirty and rumpled face lined with fatigue that matched her own. Heading out. Just wanted to let you know the night crew has been briefed on monitoring the backup systems. Electrical contractor will be here at 6 tomorrow morning to start full repairs. You're not leaving yet. It wasn't a question. Catherine moved to her desk where a bottle of whiskey, 25-year-old single malt that she kept for board celebrations, sat in a lower drawer. She pulled out 2 glasses, poured generous measures into each, and handed one to Wyatt. I don't drink on the job. You're off the clock, and after today we've both earned this. Wyatt hesitated, then took the glass. They stood in the dim office city lights beyond the windows, painting them in amber and shadow, and drank in slunts. The whiskey burned warm and real, cutting through the numbness. I would have failed today without you. Wyatt's expression didn't change. No, you wouldn't have. You'd have figured it out. Not quickly enough. Not effectively enough. Catherine stared into her glass, the amber liquid reflecting emergency lights. All my education, all my experience, all my authority useless in an actual crisis. Meanwhile, you, a maintenance worker with an associate degree and no executive title, managed the situation better than anyone in my organization. That's not about intelligence or education. It's about different kinds of knowledge. You know how to run a company. I know how to keep a building standing. Both matter. Today just happened to be a day when my skills were more immediately useful than yours. You're being generous. I'm being honest. You think I could negotiate a multi-billion-dollar acquisition? Could I manage international expansion strategies or navigate corporate law? I'd be lost in 5 minutes. We've got different expertise, that's all. Catherine shook her head, something bitter rising in her throat. It's more than expertise. You stayed calm when I was terrified. You knew exactly what to do when I was paralyzed. You led people who should have been following me because you understand something I've forgotten. What's that? How to be someone worth following instead of someone to be feared. The admission hung in the air between them, raw and vulnerable in a way Catherine hadn't allowed herself to be in years. Wyatt studied her with those steady, dark eyes that had never shown fear of her power, and she wondered what he saw. A billionaire having a moment of weakness, a corporate tyrant experiencing brief humility before returning to form or something more fundamental. A human being finally acknowledging her own limitations. Fear's an expensive currency. You spend it to buy compliance, but what you end up with is people who do exactly what you tell them and nothing more. They don't innovate. They don't speak up when they see problems. They certainly don't go the extra mile when crisis hits. He gestured toward the darkened building beyond her office. Today, when real trouble came, how many of your executives stepped up versus shut down? Catherine thought of the chaos on the 71st floor. The complaints, the demands, the handful who'd actually helped versus the majority who'd simply expected someone else to fix everything. Not enough. Because you've trained them to wait for your orders, to never act without permission, to prioritize avoiding your anger over doing what's right. Wyatt finished his whiskey, set the glass down with careful precision. That's what fear gets you. Obedience but not initiative. Compliance but not loyalty. And what does your approach get you? Today, people who trusted me enough to stay calm when they could have panicked. Electricians who listened to my assessment even though I'm not their supervisor. You standing in a server room you'd probably never visited before because you believed I'd keep you safe. He met her eyes directly and Catherine felt something shift in her chest, not attraction exactly, not yet, but recognition. Respect. The acknowledgement that this man saw the world in a way she'd forgotten existed. That's what trust gets you, Ms. Sterling. People who will walk through darkness with you instead of just doing what they're told. Catherine set her glass down carefully, hands steadier than they'd been all day. I don't know how to do that. Lead through trust instead of fear. It's not in my toolbox. Then maybe it's time to learn some new tool. You make it sound simple. I make it sound possible. There's a difference. Wyatt moved toward the door, then paused. For what it's worth, you did something today I didn't expect. You came down to the sublevels when you could have stayed safe upstairs. You asked what I needed instead of demanding what you wanted. You admitted you didn't have all the answers. Those are small things, but they're good things. Starts of things. He left before Catherine could respond. His footsteps echoing down the hallway until they faded into the building's renewed mechanical hum. Catherine stood alone in her office, surrounded by the trappings of power that had failed her when it mattered most, and felt something crack wider in the armor she'd worn for so long she'd forgotten there was skin underneath. Today her building had gone dark, her systems had failed, her authority had proved meaningless against physical reality. And a janitor had saved her empire while teaching her the uncomfortable truth that power and strength weren't the same thing. That control and leadership weren't synonyms, that the fortress she'd built around herself was actually a cage, and the key had been in her hand all along. She'd just forgotten what keys were for. The following morning, Catherine arrived at the office at 8:30 late by her standards, a 5-minute deviation that annoyed her. But she'd barely slept, kept awake by thoughts that wouldn't quiet. Wyatt's words circling her mind like vultures. Margaret Brennan's accusation echoing, the realization that she'd spent 15 years building isolation and calling it safety. The building was a controlled hive of activity. Electrical contractors working on damaged systems while employees navigated around them with determined normalcy. The crisis was over. Life continued. But as Catherine moved through the executive floor toward her office, she noticed something she'd never paid attention to before. People weren't just avoiding her. They were diminishing themselves around her, making themselves smaller, quieter, less present, as if her proximity was a force field that compressed human personality into acceptable workplace blankness. She'd done that, trained them to disappear around her, considered it professional efficiency when it was actually slow-motion cruelty. Garrett appeared with his tablet ready to recite her schedule. Ms. Sterling, the board wants a full briefing at 10. The cybersecurity team has preliminary findings, and there are approximately 40 messages requiring urgent— Garrett. Catherine interrupted him gently, which was itself so unusual that he stopped mid-sentence. Before we start, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. He looked wary, calculating whether this was a trap. Of course, Ms. Sterling. Are you afraid of me? The question hung in the air between them. Garrett's expression cycled through confusion, calculation, and finally a careful neutrality that was answer enough. I respect you tremendously, Ms. Sterling. That's not what I asked. A long pause. Then with the air of a man stepping off a cliff, yes, everyone is afraid of you. That's just how it is. Catherine absorbed the confirmation, though it wasn't really new information. And does that fear make you better at your job? Garrett seemed to be deciding whether this was indeed a trap. It makes me very careful, very thorough, very unlikely to make mistakes. But does it make you better? He met her eyes then, and she saw something flicker there, a glimpse of the human being beneath the professional assistant. No, it makes me safe. Those aren't the same thing. Thank you for being honest. That must have been difficult. You have no idea. Garrett's voice carried the faintest hint of dry humor, then he immediately looked like he regretted it. But Catherine smiled, a real smile, not the sharp-edged expression that usually passed for one. Clear my schedule from 2 to 4 this afternoon. Garrett's fingers hovered over his tablet, confusion evident. Ms. Sterling, the acquisition team has a presentation at 2:30 and reschedule it. This is more important. At 10 o'clock, the board briefing proceeded with familiar efficiency. But Catherine found herself doing something new. When the CFO, Victoria Hayes, presented financial projections, Catherine asked her opinion instead of just accepting the numbers. When the head of HR suggested a new employee wellness program, Catherine didn't dismiss it as soft inefficiency. She approved it immediately and asked what resources were needed to implement it well. Small changes, but the executives noticed. She could see it in their faces, the way they sat slightly less rigidly, spoke with fractionally more confidence. Fear was still present. You didn't erase 15 years of conditioning in a single meeting, but it had loosened its stranglehold just enough to let other emotions in. The cybersecurity review brought news Catherine had been dreading and expecting in equal measure. The lead investigator, a sharp-eyed woman named Dr. Reeves, presented findings with clinical precision. The sabotage was traced to a former contractor who maintained network access through an oversight in our security protocols. But digital forensics found something else: encrypted communications with someone outside the organization. Someone with intimate knowledge of Sterling Global's infrastructure. Catherine's blood ran cold. Who? Dr. Reeves hesitated, glancing at the board members assembled in the conference room. Ms. Sterling, the IP address traces back to Blackwell Enterprises. The room fell silent. Every board member knew that name, knew the history, the betrayal that created the Catherine Sterling they all feared. Richard Blackwell, her former partner who'd stolen everything from her 15 years ago. Continue. Catherine's voice was perfectly controlled, giving away nothing of the ice spreading through her veins. The messages suggest this was reconnaissance. The power outage was a test run. Blackwell is planning something larger, either a hostile takeover attempt, data theft for competitive advantage, or both. The sabotage wasn't meant to destroy Sterling Global. It was meant to expose vulnerabilities. Victoria Hayes, the CFO and one of Catherine's few allies on the board, spoke up. Catherine, this is personal for him. Blackwell's company has been struggling the last 2 years. Market share down, revenue flat, innovation stagnant. A hostile takeover of Sterling Global would save him, destroy you, and let him claim your success as his own. He wants to steal from you again. Catherine walked to the window, looking out over the city that had been both kingdom and battleground. 15 years. She'd rebuilt everything Richard destroyed, made herself invulnerable, erected walls so high nothing could penetrate them, and now he was back probing for weaknesses, trying to finish what he'd started. Triple security on all systems. Hire an external forensic team to audit everything. Review every contractor, every vendor, every access point. If Richard Blackwell wants war, he'll get one. But even as she gave the orders, Catherine felt the old rage stirring beneath the surface. Every wall she'd built, every connection she'd severed, every vulnerability she'd eliminated, all because Richard had taught her that trust was weakness. And now he was trying to exploit the fortress she'd built to protect herself from him. The following evening, Wyatt arrived home at 6:15 to find Harper waiting at the door, backpack already on bounce in her step. That meant she had news to share. Papa, Mrs. Chen said I did really well on my math test. I got 94%. Wyatt scooped her up despite her protests that she was too big for that now. That's my genius girl, 94%. We're celebrating with ice cream after dinner. Can we get the kind with cookie dough chunks? Whatever you want, Jellybean. Mrs. Chen, their elderly neighbor who watched Harper after school, appeared from the kitchen with a warm smile. She worked very hard on that test, studied every night this week. Thank you for helping her, Mrs. Chen. It's my pleasure. Harper is a joy. The older woman gathered her things. I'll see you tomorrow, dear. After Mrs. Chen left, Wyatt and Harper fell into their evening routine. Dinner prepped together, Harper chopping vegetables under careful supervision, chattering about her day, the girl who'd sat next to her at lunch, the art project they were starting in class, the upcoming field trip to the Natural History Museum. Normal, ordinary, the life Wyatt had chosen when he'd stepped back from high-pressure construction management to be present for these moments. Papa, can I ask you something? Always. Harper's tone shifted, becoming more serious. Do you think about Mommy at work? The question caught Wyatt off guard. Sometimes, yeah. Why do you ask? Because I thought about her today in art class. We had to draw our family. Harper pulled out a paper from her backpack, showing a crayon drawing of 3 figures, Wyatt, Harper, and a faint outline of Rachel in the background like a ghost. Teacher said I could include people who aren't here anymore if I wanted. Wyatt's throat tightened. He pulled Harper into a hug, careful of the vegetables she was holding. Mom would love that. She'd be so proud of you, sweetheart. Do you think she knows, like from heaven or wherever she is? I think if love can reach across that distance, then yeah, she knows. And she's proud of how strong and kind and smart you are. Harper was quiet for a moment, then, Papa, why did you leave your old job, the one where you were the boss? This conversation was deeper than Wyatt had anticipated for a Wednesday evening, but Harper deserved honesty. He turned off the stove, giving her his full attention. When Mom got sick, I realized that being the boss meant working long hours, being stressed all the time, missing things like your soccer games and school plays, and I decided that being with you was more important than having a fancy job title. But don't you miss it being important? I am important, Jellybean. I'm important to you. I'm important to the people in my building who need things fixed. I'm important to Mrs. Chen when I help her program her new phone. He tapped her nose gently. Oh, being important isn't about how much money you make or what your job title is. It's about showing up for the people who need you. Harper considered this with the seriousness of someone much older than 9. Is that why you helped that man in the meeting, Mr. Brennan? Yeah, he needed someone to show up for him. And sometimes being brave means speaking up even when you're scared. Were you scared? Wyatt thought of Catherine's ice-cold fury, the very real possibility of losing his job. Terrified, but I did it anyway because it was the right thing to do. Harper nodded, satisfied with this answer. I want to be brave like you, Papa. You already are, sweetheart, every single day. Later, after Harper was asleep, Wyatt sat on their small balcony with a beer, thinking about the conversation. About Rachel and how she would have handled these moments. About whether he was doing right by their daughter. about the growing weight of raising a child alone, making every decision without a partner to share the load. And unbidden, his thoughts drifted to Catherine Sterling. The way she'd looked in that dark server room, genuinely frightened for the first time since he'd met her. The vulnerability in her voice when she'd admitted she didn't know how to lead through trust. The small crack in her armor when she'd actually asked what he needed instead of demanding what she wanted. There was something there, something beneath the Ice Queen exterior, something human and hurt and struggling toward the light. Wyatt shook his head, taking a long pull from his beer. Dangerous thinking. Catherine Sterling was a billionaire CEO. He was a maintenance worker with a 9-year-old to raise. Different worlds, different lives, different trajectories entirely. But he couldn't quite shake the image of her standing in the emergency lighting, lost and alone despite being surrounded by her empire. The next morning, Garrett appeared at Catherine's office with an expression that suggested incoming trouble. "Ms. Sterling, there's someone here to see you. A child, actually. Says her name is Harper Cole." Catherine's heart performed an unexpected flip. Wyatt's daughter. "Send her up." 3 minutes later, a small girl appeared in Catherine's doorway. 9 years old, wearing a purple backpack with Wyatt's dark eyes and a gap-toothed smile that suggested a recently lost tooth. An older woman, Mrs. Chen, presumably stood behind her. "Hi, I'm Harper. My dad is Wyatt Cole. He works here." Catherine found herself smiling despite the strangeness of the situation. "I know who your father is. It's nice to meet you, Harper. I'm Catherine." "I know who you are, too. You're the boss of this whole building." Harper walked into the office without invitation, studying the space with open curiosity. "Dad says you're really smart and really good at business, but that you're learning how to be better at the people parts." Catherine's lips twitched. "That's a very diplomatic way of putting it. Your father is a wise man." "He is. That's why I wanted to talk to you." Harper set her backpack down and pulled out a slightly rumpled piece of paper. "I made you this. Dad says you've been going through something hard. And when people are going through hard things, they need to know someone cares about them." The drawing was done in crayon, a woman standing in front of a tall building surrounded by simple stick figures of people. At the top, in careful child handwriting, "It's okay to be scared. Being brave means being scared and trying anyway." Catherine stared at the paper, something cracking wider in her chest. A 9-year-old child had somehow captured the exact truth of her current struggle in crayons and construction paper. "This is beautiful, Harper. Thank you." "You're welcome. Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Are you mean—" The question was so direct, so innocent that Catherine couldn't help but laugh, a real laugh surprised out of her. "Yes, I have been for a very long time." "Why?" Catherine chose her words carefully, aware that she was speaking to a child who'd already lost her mother and might understand grief better than most adults. "Because someone hurt me once and I decided that being mean was safer than being kind. That if I was scary enough, no one could hurt me again." Harper considered this with unexpected seriousness. "When my mom died, I was really angry for a while. I was mean to my friends and to my dad. I broke stuff and yelled a lot." "I'm sorry about your mother." "Thank you. She was really nice. She used to make pancakes shaped like animals." Harper's voice wavered slightly but held steady. "Anyway, I was mean because I hurt. But then Dad told me that being mean didn't make me hurt less. It just made more people hurt, and that Mom wouldn't want me to make other people sad just because I was sad." Out of the mouths of babes, a 9-year-old explaining emotional intelligence with more clarity than most business school professors. "Your dad is right, and so are you." Catherine held up the drawing. "Can I keep this? That's why I made it. Dad says everyone needs reminders sometimes that being scared is okay, even bosses of whole buildings." Mrs. Chen cleared her throat gently. "Sweetie, we should let Ms. Sterling get back to work." "Okay." Harper grabbed her backpack and headed for the door, then paused. "Oh, one more thing. Dad's birthday is next week. We're having cake at our apartment if you want to come. It won't be fancy like you're probably used to, but Dad makes really good chocolate cake." The invitation hung in the air, innocent and sincere. Catherine's first instinct was to politely decline. She didn't attend employee social events, didn't blur professional lines, didn't engage in that kind of familiarity. But that was the old Catherine, the woman who'd been alone for 15 years and was finally admitting it wasn't working. "I'd like that very much. Thank you for inviting me." Harper beamed, gap-toothed and genuine. Then she was gone, leaving Catherine alone with a crayon drawing that somehow meant more than any of the awards and accolades lining her office walls. She pinned it to her bulletin board right next to her Harvard MBA degree. The juxtaposition was absurd and perfect. Monday morning brought the second strike. Victoria Hayes called Catherine at 7:15, voice tight with controlled panic. "Catherine, we have a problem. Sterling Global stock dropped 12% in overnight Asian trading." "Why, anonymous leak to the financial press. Someone released internal documents suggesting Sterling Global has major security vulnerabilities. Documents specifically mention last week's power outage as systemic infrastructure failure threatening data integrity." Catherine's hands clenched around the phone. "Richard Blackwell." "Almost certainly. The leak is carefully timed to damage us before the quarterly earnings call. If the stock stays down, his hostile takeover bid becomes more viable. He's been accumulating shares through shell companies for months. We just didn't see the pattern until now." By 9 o'clock, Catherine was in an emergency board meeting. Half the members looked grim, the other half looked angry, and sitting in the corner as a consulting expert invited by board member Harrison Wolfe was Richard Blackwell himself. Catherine's rage was a living thing coiled in her chest like a snake. "What is he doing here?" Harrison's 60-something with silver hair and the confidence of old money met her glare without flinching. "Mr. Blackwell has expertise in corporate turnarounds. We thought his perspective would be valuable." Richard smirked, and Catherine saw the same charismatic face that had betrayed her 15 years ago. Older now, lines around the eyes, but still radiating the easy charm that had fooled her once. "You orchestrated the sabotage. You leaked confidential documents." Richard's voice was smooth as silk. "I have no idea what you're talking about, Catherine. I'm simply here to help the board make an informed decision about leadership during this challenging time." "Ms. Sterling, these accusations are unprofessional." Harrison's tone carried reproof. "This is exactly why we're concerned about your judgment lately. You seem volatile." The board spent the next 3 hours discussing Catherine's recent behavioral changes, the anonymous feedback program wasting resources, the employee wellness initiative not ROI-focused, time spent in the employee cafeteria instead of high-value meetings, and this morning skipping critical board preparation to visit a maintenance worker's daughter in the hospital. "You've gone soft, Catherine," Harrison concluded. "In the business world, soft means dead, especially when competitors like Richard are circling. I'm proposing we place you on temporary administrative leave while we address these security concerns. Mr. Blackwell has graciously offered to consult on restructuring." Catherine understood immediately. Richard would gain access to the company, could position himself for a full takeover within 6 months, and she would watch everything she'd built get stolen from her again. The vote was scheduled for Friday. 4 days to fight for her company or lose it all. That same afternoon, word spread through Sterling Global like wildfire. Employees whispered in break rooms, texted in stairwells, gathered in small, worried clusters. If Catherine was removed, whoever replaced her would be worse. At least Catherine was trying to change. At least she'd started seeing them as humans instead of machines. Wyatt heard the gossip while replacing ceiling tiles on the 44th floor. He listened to the fear in people's voices, saw the genuine concern for Catherine's position, and made a decision. Wednesday at noon, Wyatt did something he had no authority to do. He called an emergency all-staff town hall. Building operations staff spread the word. 400 employees showed up in the main auditorium, confused about why a janitor was leading a meeting. Wyatt took the podium, heart hammering but voice steady. "I know I'm not an executive, I'm just building maintenance. But I've been here 3 weeks and I've seen something important. Ms. Sterling is changing. She's trying to become a leader who cares about people, not just profits, and she's being punished for it. The audience was silent, listening. I've worked a lot of places, construction sites, schools, offices, and I can tell you fear-based leadership always fails eventually. You can force compliance with terror, but you can't force excellence, innovation, loyalty. Ms. Sterling is learning that. She's admitting she was wrong. That takes more courage than maintaining power through fear. Wyatt's voice grew stronger. If the board removes her for trying to be better, what message does that send? That cruelty is rewarded and growth is punished. Last week, during the power outage, I saw Ms. Sterling do something remarkable. She came down 73 floors into a dangerous situation instead of staying safe. She asked what I needed instead of demanding what she wanted. She admitted she didn't have all the answers. That's not weakness, that's strength. He looked out at the sea of faces. You can vote for Richard Blackwell's version of leadership, fear, sabotage, betrayal, or you can vote for Catherine's transformation, courage, growth, humanity. But know this, if you remove her for trying to be better, you're not protecting the company, you're killing it. The applause started slowly, then built into something that shook the rafters. Thursday evening, Wyatt got the call every parent dreads. School nurse voice, professionally calm but carrying urgency underneath. Mr. Cole Harper had an accident on the playground. She fell from the monkey bars, possible broken arm. We called an ambulance. She's asking for you. Wyatt's world narrowed to a single point. He dropped everything, raced to Queen's General Hospital, found his daughter in the emergency room with her brave face crumbling when she saw him. Papa, it hurts. He held her good hand, heartbreaking. I know, Jellybean. The doctors are going to fix it. 4 hours of x-rays, setting, casting. Clean break, the doctor said. 6 weeks in a cast. Harper was brave through the procedure but exhausted after. Wyatt sat beside her hospital bed, watching her sleep, and felt the familiar terror of single parenthood. What if he'd lost her? What if something worse had happened? His phone buzzed. Mrs. Chen offering to help. Wyatt thanked her, said he'd be home tomorrow, probably miss work. She said she'd spread the word. What Wyatt didn't expect was for word to reach Catherine. Friday morning at 8 o'clock, Catherine stood in the pediatric ward of Queen's General Hospital, holding a bag from the gift shop. Inside was a stuffed dragon, Harper's favorite animal, according to the bedtime stories Wyatt had mentioned once in passing. Wyatt looked up from Harper's bedside, shock evident. Ms. Sterling, what are you doing here? Garrett told me about Harper. I wanted to make sure she was okay. She held up the bag, suddenly uncertain in a way she never was in boardrooms. I brought her something. Wyatt's expression cycled through surprise, suspicion, and tentative gratitude. You didn't have to come. I know you have the board vote today. The board can wait. Harper's more important. The words surprised Catherine even as she said them, but they were true. A 9-year-old girl who'd given her a crayon drawing about bravery mattered more than defending her position to a board that might not understand what leadership meant. Harper woke up as Catherine entered the room, purple cast, propped on pillows, tired but managing a smile. Catherine, you came. Of course I came. Brought you something. The stuffed dragon was purple to match the cast. Harper hugged it immediately, declaring she'd name it Wyatt Jr. because dragons are brave and Dad is the bravest person I know. Catherine sat by the bed and they talked. About school, about the accident, about how scary it was when things hurt. And for an hour, Catherine wasn't a billionaire CEO. She was just a woman sitting with a hurting child, offering what comfort she could. Wyatt walked Catherine out to the parking lot afterward, morning sun bright after the fluorescent hospital lighting. Thank you for coming for the dragon for the insurance coverage. You didn't have to. Yes, I did, because Harper matters, and you matter. Not just as employees, as people I care about. The admission hung between them, more vulnerable than anything Catherine had said in years. Wyatt stepped closer, close enough that Catherine could see the exhaustion in his eyes. The worry lines etched deeper than usual. Catherine, I need to tell you something. Her heart hammered. Yes. When Rachel died, I promised myself I'd never risk my heart again. Too painful, too complicated. His voice was low, rough with emotion. "But watching you transform these past weeks, seeing you try to become a better person despite everything in your world telling you power is safer, it's been remarkable. You've been remarkable. Wyatt, you don't have to say anything. I just wanted you to know whatever the board decides today, you've already succeeded at something harder than running a company. What's that? You've remembered how to be human, and that's beautiful." They stood in the parking lot, something electric between them. Not quite romance yet, but possibility. The foundation being laid for something neither had expected. "I have to go face the board now." "I know, but Catherine—" Wyatt's voice stopped her. "Come to the vote. At 2. I want you there." "Why?" "Because you need to see what you've built. Not the company. The people who believe in you." Catherine drove back to Manhattan with her mind churning. In 4 hours, the board would vote on her future. Richard Blackwell was positioning for takeover. Harrison Wolfe was leading the charge to remove her. Half the board wanted the old Catherine back, ruthless, untouchable, isolated. But the other half had seen the changes, had benefited from them. And somewhere in that building, 400 employees had attended Wyatt's town hall, had signed petitions, had decided that growth deserved a chance. Catherine arrived at Sterling Global at noon, went straight to her office and began preparing. Not for defeat, for war. Because Richard Blackwell had stolen from her once. He'd taught her that trust was weakness, that vulnerability was danger, that the only safety was in isolation. But Wyatt Cole had taught her something different. That strength came from connection. That power without humanity was just expensive loneliness. That being worth following mattered more than being feared. And Catherine would be damned if she let Richard take this company after she'd finally learned what it meant to truly lead it. The boardroom at 2 o'clock was packed, 12 board members. Richard Blackwell in his corner, Victoria Hayes looking determined, Harrison Wolfe looking smug, and standing at the back of the room invited by Catherine herself, Wyatt Cole in his gray maintenance uniform, arms crossed, face set. Catherine stood at the head of the table looking at each board member in turn. "Let's begin." Harrison Wolfe opened the proceedings with the efficiency of a man who believed he'd already won. "This emergency session addresses concerns about Ms. Sterling's recent performance and judgment. Over the past 3 weeks, we've witnessed behavioral changes that suggest she's unfit to lead Sterling Global through current challenges." He gestured to a presentation screen. Charts appeared: stock performance, the power outage incident, the leaked documents, employee feedback programs labeled as wasteful spending. Each data point carefully curated to paint Catherine as weak, distracted, compromised. Ms. Sterling has implemented programs with no clear ROI. She's spent company time on personal matters, visiting employees' families, eating lunch in cafeterias, creating anonymous feedback systems that generate complaints rather than productivity. And most concerning, she's shown vulnerability at precisely the moment our competitors are attacking. Harrison paused for effect. "Gentlemen, ladies, weakness invites predation. Ms. Sterling's transformation, as some call it, is actually deterioration. She's lost her edge, and in business that edge is everything." Richard Blackwell leaned forward from his corner, expression sympathetic in a way that made Catherine's skin crawl. "I take no pleasure in this, Catherine, truly. But Harrison has a point. You've changed, and not for the better. The woman I knew 15 years ago would never have let sentiment cloud business judgment." Catherine's laugh was sharp as broken glass. "The woman you knew 15 years ago trusted you completely, and you systematically robbed her blind while looking her in the eye every morning. So forgive me if I don't value your opinion on judgment. That's ancient history. Is it, Dr. Reeves, would you share what you found about the power outage sabotage?" The cybersecurity investigator stood, pulling up new data. "Our forensic team traced the intrusion to shell companies controlled by Blackwell Enterprises. We also found evidence of stock manipulation. Mr. Blackwell has been accumulating Sterling Global shares through intermediaries for 6 months, positioning for a hostile takeover timed with manufactured crises. The room erupted. Board members turned on Richard, questions flying. Harrison's face went pale. "You knew about this," Victoria Hayes demanded of Harrison. "You invited a corporate saboteur to consult on leadership." I thought," Richard assured me his interest was purely advisory. "Harrison thought he'd get a cut of the takeover." Catherine's voice cut through the cave like a blade. "Isn't that right? You've been positioning yourself as facilitator, hoping Richard would keep you on the board when he took control." Harrison's silence was confession enough. Richard stood smoothing his jacket with practiced ease. "This is all speculation. Coincidence. You have no proof of my involvement in any sabotage." "Actually, we do," Wyatt's voice carried from the back of the room. All eyes swiveled to the maintenance worker who'd somehow inserted himself into a board meeting. He stepped forward, pulling a folder from inside his jacket. "During the power outage investigation, I documented everything. Took photos of the timer mechanism in the electrical room. Preserved the device before it could be removed. The FBI has been very interested in examining it." He handed the folder to Victoria Hayes. "Fingerprints came back yesterday. The timer was installed by a contractor who works exclusively for Blackwell Enterprises. Same contractor who had access to our building through maintenance credentials that should have been revoked 6 months ago but weren't because someone with board access prevented the security update." Wyatt looked directly at Harrison. Someone who thought they'd profit from the chaos. The silence that followed was absolute. Richard's practiced charm cracked fury bleeding through. "You're taking the word of a janitor over mine. I'm a respected business leader." "You're a thief." Catherine's voice was ice and iron. 15 years ago, you stole my company, my work, my trust. You thought you'd broken me. Instead, you taught me to build something you could never touch. And now you're trying to steal it again because your own company is failing without my innovations to pilfer." She turned to the board. "The choice is simple. Vote to remove me and Richard gets exactly what he wants: access to destroy Sterling Global from the inside while facing federal charges. Or vote to keep me, support the changes I'm implementing, and watch this company become something greater than fear ever built." "The changes are making us weak." Harrison's voice cracked with desperation. "No." Wyatt spoke again, moving to stand beside Catherine. "The changes are making Sterling Global strong in ways you're too afraid to see. I'm going to tell you what I told 400 employees 2 days ago. You can have a company built on fear where people do exactly what they're told and nothing more, where innovation dies because no one dares speak up, where the best talent flees to competitors who treat them like humans. Or you can have a company built on trust where people bring their best ideas because they're heard, where crisis reveals strength instead of panic, where excellence comes from engagement rather than terror." He looked at each board member. "I'm just a maintenance worker. I have no stake in this vote, but I've worked construction sites, schools, hospitals, corporate towers, and I can tell you with absolute certainty the company Catherine Sterling is building now will outlast any empire built on fear. Because fear is expensive. It costs you innovation, loyalty, resilience, and eventually it costs you everything." Victoria Hayes stood. "I move to table Harrison's removal proposal. And I move to expel Richard Blackwell from this meeting pending federal investigation. All in favor?" 8 hands rose. Harrison and 3 of his allies abstained, clearly calculating their exposure. Motion carried. Victoria's satisfaction was evident. "Mr. Blackwell, security will escort you out." Richard's mask shattered completely. He lunged toward Catherine, rage transforming his handsome features into something ugly. "You think you've won. You're nothing without me. Everything you built, you learned from me." Wyatt stepped between them, not threatening but immovable. "You should leave now." Security arrived, flanking Richard. As they led him away, he shouted over his shoulder, "This isn't over, Catherine. You can't change who you are. You'll always be the cold bitch who built an empire on other people's fear." The door closed behind him. The board sat in stunned silence. Catherine remained standing, hands steady on the conference table. "Harrison, you're removed from the board, effective immediately. Victoria, I want a full audit of every decision Harrison influenced. If there are other compromised members, I want them identified and removed." Harrison stood face ashen and left without a word. Catherine surveyed the remaining board members. "I know many of you are uncomfortable with the changes I'm implementing. You prefer the Catherine Sterling who ruled through intimidation because it was predictable, safe. But that woman was dying inside her fortress, and the company was dying with her." She moved to the window, looking out over Manhattan. "I'm not asking you to trust me blindly. I'm asking you to look at the results. Employee retention up 58%. Innovation proposals up 43%. The teams that used to hide problems until they became disasters are now bringing solutions before crisis hits. That's what happens when people feel safe to speak." Victoria stood in support. "Catherine's right. The quarterly numbers don't lie. We're more profitable now than we were 6 months ago, despite Richard's sabotage. The company is stronger." "But what about leadership presence?" One of the older board members spoke up, genuine concern in his voice. "Catherine, you've softened. In negotiations and presentations, will our competitors see vulnerability? They'll see confidence that doesn't require cruelty to prove itself. They'll see a leader secure enough to admit mistakes and strong enough to change course. And frankly, they'll see something they can't compete with: a company where the best people want to work, not a place they flee from the moment better options appear." The debate continued another hour. Questions about implementation metrics, timelines for cultural transformation. Catherine answered each with the same balance of data and humanity that had become her new signature. Finally, Victoria called for a vote. "All in favor of maintaining Catherine Sterling as CEO with full authority to continue organizational transformation?" 9 hands rose. 2 abstentions. Motion carries. This meeting is adjourned. As board members filed out, several stopped to speak with Catherine. Some offered support, others remained skeptical but willing to give her time. Harrison's allies left quickly, clearly worried about their own exposure. Victoria lingered last. "You did it. You kept the company and exposed Richard. We did it. Thank you for standing with me. You made it easy. The old Catherine would never have admitted she needed help. This version, she's going to be formidable." Victoria smiled. "And for what it's worth, I like her better." After Victoria left, only Wyatt remained. He stood by the window where Catherine had delivered her speech, looking out at the city sprawling below. "You were right to invite me. I needed to see that." "See what? That 400 people signed a petition because they believe in your transformation. That board members are willing to risk their positions supporting you. That even in a room full of powerful people, there are those who choose growth over safety." Catherine joined him at the window. "You defended me to that board. You had nothing to gain and everything to lose. I had everything to gain. The chance to work somewhere that values people over profit. The chance to show Harper what leadership looks like when it's done right. The chance to—" He stopped, seeming to catch himself. "The chance to what?" Wyatt turned to face her fully. "The chance to be part of something meaningful. To watch someone choose courage over control. To see the woman I'm falling for become who she was always meant to be." The confession hung between them, enormous and terrifying and wonderful. Catherine's breath caught. "Wyatt, I'm still learning how to be human. I don't know if I can be what you need. You already are, flawed and struggling and brave enough to try anyway. That's more than enough." The kiss happened slowly, tentatively, like neither quite believed it was real. Catherine's hands found Wyatt's shoulders. His arms circled her waist, and for the first time in 15 years, she let herself feel something other than control. When they broke apart, both were smiling. "This is going to be complicated. I'm your boss. There will be talk. Let them talk. I'm not ashamed of who I am or who I love." "Do you love me?" Wyatt's thumb traced her cheekbone gently. "I'm getting there. Are you—" Catherine thought about the past 3 weeks, the terror and transformation, the fortress cracking open, the discovery that being vulnerable didn't mean being weak. "Yes, I think I've been falling since you walked into that boardroom with a mop and told me I was wrong. You weren't wrong, you were just lost. We all get lost sometimes. And you found me. We found each other." They stood together in the boardroom as afternoon light painted the city gold, two people from completely different worlds who'd somehow built a bridge across the distance. The following week passed in a blur of activity. Federal investigators interviewed staff about Richard's sabotage. Harrison resigned from the board in disgrace. Sterling Global stock recovered and then climbed higher than before the crisis. And Catherine continued implementing changes that transformed the company culture day by day. She started weekly office hours where any employee could sign up for 15 minutes of her time. She approved the employee wellness program with full funding. She promoted Ethan Brennan to lead a new innovation task force. She ate lunch in the cafeteria every Wednesday and people stopped freezing when she entered. Small changes, incremental shifts, but they accumulated into something profound. On Saturday, Catherine stood outside Wyatt's building in Queens holding a bottle of wine and feeling more nervous than she had facing the board. Harper's birthday party. Real life, not corporate theater. People who would judge her not on quarterly earnings but on whether she treated a 9-year-old with kindness. She climbed the 3 flights, knocked on door 3B. Wyatt opened it wearing jeans and a casual shirt that made him look younger, more relaxed than he ever did at work. "Catherine, come in. Welcome to the chaos." The apartment was small but warm, filled with mismatched furniture and child artwork on every surface. Harper's drawings covered the refrigerator like wallpaper. Photos of Rachel smiled from various frames, her presence still part of the home's fabric. A handful of Harper's friends were playing some elaborate game involving pillows and imagination. Several neighbors had brought food, creating a potluck spread on the kitchen counter. It was loud and crowded and completely unlike any social event Catherine had attended in years. It was also exactly where she wanted to be. "Catherine." Harper spotted her and ran over, dragging a friend by the hand. "This is my friend Mia. Mia, this is Catherine. She's learning how to be nicer." Wyatt winced. "Harper, sweetheart. What you said that. You said she's going through a transformation." Catherine laughed, surprising herself with how easy it came. "It's okay. Harper's right. I am learning to be nicer, and it's harder than running a billion-dollar company." She handed over the wine to Wyatt and a wrapped package to Harper. "For you, since I missed your actual birthday." The art supply set was high-quality professional-grade markers, colored pencils, sketch pads. Harper's eyes went wide. "Whoa, these are fancy. Dad, look at these markers. Those are very nice. What do you say?" "Oh, thank you, Catherine. These are awesome." Harper hugged her spontaneously, a quick squeeze that Catherine wasn't prepared for, but found she didn't mind at all. The evening unfolded with the comfortable chaos of people who genuinely enjoyed each other's company. Catherine met Wyatt's neighbors, a retired teacher named Ruth, who'd known Rachel, a nurse named Marcus, who worked nights, a young couple with twins who lived across the hall. They asked what she did, and when she explained she ran the company where Wyatt worked, they responded with interest but no particular deference. To them, she was just another person at a birthday party eating potato salad and discussing the challenges of Queens parking. It was startlingly normal, and Catherine discovered that normal felt like coming home after a long exile. As the party wound down and parents collected sugar-high children, Catherine found herself on the small balcony with Wyatt, both holding beers and watching the neighborhood settle into evening. "Thank you for inviting me. This was nice. Really nice." "Thanks for coming. I wasn't sure you would." "Neither was I, honestly. This isn't my usual scene." "What is your usual scene?" Catherine thought about her empty penthouse, her solitary meals, her evenings spent working or staring at walls. "Nothing really. I don't have a scene. I have work, and then I have hours between work sessions that I fill with more work." "That sounds exhausting." "It is. I just didn't realize it until recently." She took a sip of beer. "Your daughter is remarkable. Kind and smart and brave. She gets that from Rachel. I'm just trying not to mess up what her mother started." "I think you're doing more than that. You're showing Harper what it means to be a good person. That matters more than any career success." They stood in comfortable silence as the city lights began to glow against the darkening sky. Catherine felt something shift in her chest, not the dramatic transformation of movie moments, but a quiet settling like pieces of herself she'd scattered years ago finally finding their way back home. "Can I tell you something?" Her voice was soft, almost lost in the evening sounds. "Always. When you first challenged me in that boardroom, I hated you. Genuinely considered having you fired on the spot. I thought you were arrogant and inappropriate and completely out of line." Wyatt smiled. "I was out of line, but I wasn't wrong. No, you weren't, and that's what bothered me most. You saw through everything I'd built, all the power and fear and control, and you called it what it actually was. Loneliness in expensive clothes." She turned to face him fully. "You've changed my life. In 3 weeks, you've made me question everything I thought I knew about leadership and success and what actually matters. You did the work yourself. I just asked some uncomfortable questions. You did more than that. You showed me what a life built on connection instead of fear actually looks like. You modeled a different way of being in the world, and you were patient with me while I figured out whether I was brave enough to try it myself." Wyatt set his beer down, reaching for her hand. "Are you brave enough?" Catherine thought about the past 3 weeks. The apologies she'd made, the vulnerability she'd shown, the small daily choices to be human instead of powerful, the sheer terror of admitting she'd been wrong for 15 years. "I'm getting there. It helps having examples to follow. People who've been through hard things and came out the other side still capable of kindness. We've all got hard things in our history. The question is whether we let those things define us or teach us." From inside the apartment, Harper's voice called out, "Papa Catherine, come have cake." They went inside to find a chocolate cake with slightly lopsided frosting and 38 candles, creating a minor fire hazard. Harper had clearly helped with the decorating given the enthusiastic sprinkle distribution. Everyone sang happy birthday slightly off-key. Wyatt made a wish and blew out the candles. Harper demanded to know what he wished for, and he said what parents always say: "Can't tell you or it won't come true." But later, as Catherine was preparing to leave, Wyatt walked her to the door and said quietly, "I wished for Harper to grow up in a world where people are kinder to each other than they have to be. Where success doesn't mean sacrificing humanity, where powerful people remember their people first." "That's a good wish." "I thought so. And I think you're helping make it come true." Catherine felt tears prick her eyes. Actual tears, something she hadn't allowed herself in years. "I'm going to mess this up sometimes. Fall back into old patterns. Be the ice queen you met in that boardroom. Probably. And I'll probably be overprotective with Harper and close myself off when I'm scared. We're both works in progress. So we figure it out together? Together sounds good." The kiss goodbye was sweet and tentative and full of promise. Catherine drove back to Manhattan with her mind full of chocolate cake and crayon drawings and the possibility of building a life that looked nothing like the fortress she'd inhabited for 15 years. 9 months later, Sterling Global Industries looked different from the inside. Not in the physical sense, still 73 floors of glass and steel piercing the Manhattan skyline. But the energy had shifted. The fear that once permeated every floor had dissipated, replaced by something Catherine had never thought possible in a corporate environment: actual engagement. She arrived at 7:30 on a Thursday morning, still early but no longer obsessively so. The executive floor was already bustling with early arrivals. People greeted her by name, not Ms. Sterling with terror in their eyes, but Catherine with genuine warmth. Garrett appeared with his tablet, but instead of launching into schedule recitation, he smiled. "Morning, Catherine. How was Harper's soccer game yesterday?" "They won 3-2. Harper scored the winning goal in the last 2 minutes." Wyatt nearly lost his voice, cheering. "That's fantastic. My daughter's team plays them next week. May the best 9-year-olds win." This conversation, casual, human, normal, would have been unthinkable a year ago. Catherine would have considered it unprofessional, a waste of time. Now she recognized it as the foundation of something more valuable than efficiency. Connection. The kind that made people want to work hard because they felt valued, not because they were terrified. The morning briefing at 9 included her executive team, but the dynamic had transformed. When the head of marketing presented a campaign that wasn't working, he didn't make excuses or deflect blame. He simply said, "This approach isn't resonating with our target demographic. I'd like to pivot strategy, and here's how." Catherine listened, asked clarifying questions, and approved the change without making him feel like a failure for trying something that didn't work. This was the difference. People brought problems when they were still small and fixable rather than hiding them until they became disasters. Ethan Brennan, now heading innovation, presented the quarterly results from his task force. 3 new patents filed, 2 major efficiency improvements implemented. A culture survey showing employee satisfaction at all-time highs. The feedback loop you created with the anonymous suggestion system has been incredible. People are bringing ideas they would have kept quiet about before, and roughly 60% of them are genuinely useful. What about the other 40%? Not feasible, but we're tracking them anyway. Sometimes an unworkable idea sparks something that is workable. We're building a culture where throwing out ideas feels safe. After the meeting, Ethan lingered. "Catherine, I wanted to thank you again for the apology for this opportunity for changing. I know that sounds strange to say to your boss." "It's not strange, it's honest, and I'm glad you felt safe enough to say it." She smiled. "How's your mother? Still fierce, still convinced you walk on water now?" "I wouldn't go that far, but I'm trying." The afternoon brought a crisis that would have once sent Catherine into ruthless overdrive. A major client threatened to leave for a competitor, citing better pricing. The old Catherine would have matched the price immediately, then fired whoever let the relationship deteriorate. The new Catherine called a meeting with the account team, listened to their assessment, and asked, "What does this client actually need? Is it really about price, or is there something else we're missing?" The junior account manager, who'd been terrified to speak in meetings 6 months ago, raised her hand. "I think it's about attention. We assigned them a junior team because we didn't think the account was large enough for senior staff. But they're growing fast and they want to feel valued. So what do? Assign a senior relationship manager. Show them we're invested in their growth. Maybe we can't match the competitor's price, but we can offer something they can't, a partnership that scales with them." Catherine approved the strategy immediately. The client stayed, and the junior account manager got promoted to senior the following month. These were the transformations that mattered. Not dramatic moments, but daily choices to trust people's insights, to value relationships over short-term wins, to build something sustainable rather than something built on fear's shaky foundation. At 5:30, Catherine left the office, a departure time that would have shocked her a year ago. She had dinner plans. Real plans with people she cared about, not business obligations disguised as social events. She drove to Queens, parked outside the now familiar building, climbed the 3 flights that no longer winded her. Wyatt opened the door before she could knock, pulling her into a kiss that still made her heart race. "How was your day?" "Productive. Yours?" "Fixed a major HVAC issue that would have cost $200,000 to replace next year." "Pretty good." He led her inside, where Harper was sprawling on the floor doing homework, the stuffed dragon Catherine had given her serving as a pencil holder. "Catherine, can you help with my math? Dad's terrible at fractions." "I am not terrible. You said they were invented by mathematicians who wanted to torture children." Wyatt grinned sheepishly. "I may have said something like that." Catherine sat on the floor with Harper helping her work through the problems. Not because she had to, but because this was her life now. Homework, help, and family dinners, and the ordinary magic of being part of something bigger than quarterly earnings. Later, after Harper went to bed, Catherine and Wyatt sat on the balcony under stars barely visible through New York's light pollution. "I got a call from Victoria Hayes today. The board wants to extend my contract for another 5 years." "That's incredible. Congratulations." "I told them I'd only accept if they agreed to formalize the cultural transformation as company policy. Make it part of the corporate charter that Sterling Global values people as much as profits." Bold move. What did they say? "They agreed because the numbers don't lie. We're more profitable now than we were a year ago, and our talent retention is the best in our industry." Turns out treating people well is actually good business. Wyatt took her hand, thumb tracing circles on her palm. You've built something remarkable, Catherine. Not just a successful company, but a place where people want to work, where they bring their best because they feel valued. I couldn't have done it without you. You showed me what was possible. You did the hard work. I just asked questions. They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the city hum around them. Catherine thought about the woman she'd been a year ago, isolated, terrified of vulnerability, convinced that power and fear were the same thing. That woman wouldn't recognize her now, wouldn't understand how Catherine could be happy sitting on a balcony in Queens holding hands with a maintenance worker, living a life that looked nothing like the empire she'd built. But that woman had been dying inside her fortress. And this woman, the one who'd learned to be human again, to trust, to love, to choose connection over control, was finally truly alive. Wyatt, can I tell you something? Always. A year ago, Richard Blackwell told me I'd always be the cold woman who built an empire on fear, that I couldn't change who I was, and he was wrong. I changed. I'm still changing. Every day I choose to be someone different than who I was, someone kinder, someone braver, someone capable of love. She turned to face him, fully stars reflected in his dark eyes. Someone who knows that the greatest success isn't what you build, but who you become in the building. And I became someone I'm proud of because you believed I could before I believed it myself. Wyatt pulled her close, and Catherine rested her head on his shoulder, fitting perfectly against him like she'd always belonged there. I love you. I think I've loved you since you walked into my boardroom and told me I was wasting time. Since you refused to be afraid of me. Since you saw the person I could be underneath all the armor. I love you too. Flawed and fierce and brave enough to tear down everything you built to become who you were meant to be. They kissed under the inadequate stars, two people who'd found each other in the wreckage of old lives and built something new. Something better. Something worth more than all Catherine's billions combined. Inside the apartment, Harper's drawing was taped to the refrigerator, the one about being scared and trying anyway. Next to it was a new one she'd made last week, 3 stick figures holding hands. Wyatt, Harper, and Catherine. A family not defined by blood but by choice. The city hummed around them, full of millions of lives being lived in millions of different ways. Each one mattered. Each one was valuable. Each one contained someone just as complex and important as Catherine herself, regardless of wealth or status or accomplishments. She finally understood that, finally felt it in her bones instead of just knowing it intellectually. And in that understanding, in that hard-won empathy, she found something worth more than any empire built on fear. She found herself, the real version, the human version, the one who'd been buried under 15 years of armor and isolation and terror of being hurt again. She found home, not a place but a way of being in the world, connected, vulnerable, brave enough to be scared and try anyway. As they rode the elevator down the next morning, Catherine heading to Manhattan, Wyatt to his shift at Sterling Global, Harper squeezed between them, still half asleep. Papa, do you think Mommy would like Catherine? The question made Wyatt pause, choosing words carefully. I think she'd love her, Jelly Bean. Your mom always said the bravest people were the ones who chose to change, even when change was terrifying. Harper nodded, satisfied. Then, with the casual profundity of children, Good, because Catherine's part of our family now, right? Catherine's throat tightened. Wyatt looked at her, question in his eyes. Yes. Her voice was steady despite the emotion welling up. If that's okay with both of you, I'd very much like to be part of this family. It's more than okay. Wyatt's hand found hers, squeezed gently. It's everything. The elevator reached the ground floor. They stepped out into the morning, 3 people who'd found each other against all odds and built something that looked nothing like traditional success but felt like everything worth having. Catherine Sterling had spent 15 years building a fortress to protect herself from pain, and in tearing it down, in choosing vulnerability over invincibility and remembering how to be human instead of powerful. She'd found the only thing that mattered. Love, connection, The radical choice to be known and to know others despite the risks. The courage to try anyway, and that she'd learned was the greatest success of all.